Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here, and I know, if you're like a traveling comedian, you go into a city, oh, I'm really glad to be here tonight. Is it Pittsburgh or is it Philadelphia? But I actually am really glad to be here because I live a half block off Oak Street, and this is my hood. And I really like the fact that reaching out, that it's so encouraging that so many people are interested in Rudy. And I've been feeling rather estranged from the society in which I live, in the world in which I live these days, even more so that than COVID, actually. When David said, hey, your son knows my son. I didn't know that. But when he told me that, there was a sense of, oh, I'm connected with this person. Oh, I like that. And the connectivity of the people who care about Rudy makes me feel better. And so I really welcome the opportunity to tell people more about Rudy, and maybe there are some people here tonight who know things about Rudy that I don't know, and if you do, I want to know what you know. And if you really knew him well, I need to go out to coffee with you, because my mission is to raise awareness of Rudy, and I think eventually, after a couple of books, we really have to persuade the city of Vancouver to erect some sort of monument, something meaningful for and about Rudy. It is simply unconscionable that this has not been done, but it's because of lack of awareness and ignorance. And so I want to overcome that, and that's kind of like my end goal. I feel it's shameful to live in a place where, I'm trying to put this, I'm trying not to be too doctrinaire here, but this is what I come back to. Rudy, historians now, collectively, it's taken them 80 years. Now if you look up on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia, the historians fight back and forth and change things, and the Holocaust deniers get in there. So it actually ends up being meaningful what historians will say in an entry on Rudy Vrba. And it's been for years now, that Rudy Vrba and Wexler, by their report, saved 200,000 Hungarian Jews. And I asked myself, as a kind of a superficial journalist guy, I don't know a lot about Jewish history, but it seems to me there was a guy named Moses, and he's supposed to be credited with saving some Jews. How many could a guy in a desert with no food, the numbers can be crazy, but realistically, how many people could survive what he did with Moses to that journey? Do you think he had 200,000 people helping him along? I doubt it. So then you say to yourself, Rudy Vrba saved more Jews than any other person in history. And I kind of go, and he lived here, in the place where I live. Doesn't know who he is. And I'm going, something's rotten in Denmark, and something's rotten in Vancouver, and something's rotten in our educational system, that having grown up for all my life, I don't know who this guy is. Doesn't matter whether I'm Jewish or not. I should know who that guy is. So with this kind of simplistic, earnest anger at ignorance, I set upon the course of trying to do something. And because I was very fortunate to have known Rudy, and that really makes a big difference, because I kind of knew what he was like. And I like to tell the story that Rudy Vrba gave me the best advice I've ever received from anybody. He said, Alan, I can picture it on the sidewalk. He said, Alan, if you ever have a problem, just stop and ask, what, you lost your keys to your car? Or something like that? Ask yourself, is this going to be a problem for you 1 year from now? And if the answer is no, it's not a problem. And I think if you survive almost 2 years in Auschwitz, you have a pretty good way of figuring out what is a problem and what is not a problem. And so Rudy had these deep wisdoms that most of us do not have. And because I got to know him a little bit, I got to have the sense And Joseph is here somewhere. Where's Joseph? Oh, there he is. Yeah, if you know him, you realize you're in the presence of somebody remarkable. You just know it. And so my glimmering of understanding of Rudy allowed me to enter in to the strange resolve of thinking, well, I'm a really good writer and I'm going to stop doing my newspaper. I'm going to do this instead. So, which I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years. So this is all very good. I'm really delighted to be here. And one of the things that strikes me is we're all here together. And maybe some people here know quite a bit about Rudy already. And maybe there's other people who actually know nothing. So how can I bridge this and be useful to both camps? And it struck me what I should do to connect us all is I'm going to pretend that you and I are on I was going to say 12-hour train ride, but strangers on a train. You know, you can meet a stranger on the train and tell them things that you never tell anybody else because you're never going to see them again. So you and I are going to go on a train ride together, and I'm going to tell you what I know about Rudy Vrba. I may never see you again, but you're going to remember what I tell you, because what I'm telling you is the truth. So that's what I would like to do, speak generally in a biographical wave and see what comes out, because some things will come out for the people who know a lot already that they don't know. But before I do that, I want to do something actually more, maybe this is the highlight of the night. Yes, it is. As some of you know, after Rudy got out of Auschwitz and he wrote his report, he was living undercover in Slovakia. And he had 3 other people who escaped living with him. And Rudy decided, I'm just not going to stay in hiding. I got to go and join the partisans, fight against the Nazis. And this is another thing that makes Rudy extraordinary. No, I'm going to fight back. And so he found out where the partisans are. He went and fought with the partisans. It was first a Slovakian troop, but they got overtaken by the Soviets, and so they became sort of run by the partisans were kind of pro-communist. And so Rudy and 2 other guys were the only Jews in this outfit fighting the Nazis. It was very difficult for 7 months in the snow in the mountains when the people who you're fighting against are anti-Semitic, or fighting with are anti-Semitic. Anyway, Rudy was a machine gunner. He fought in 10 battles and obviously survived. And at the end of the war, he received 3 military decorations for his bravery and for his valor. And I got to know his woman partner friend who he lived with in England after his wife divorced. Her name was Gillian Bryant, wonderful person, scientist, lives in Hawaii. I went to Hawaii, interviewed her there. What a great person. Anyway, she handed me 2 things. She handed me a copy of a book which is down there below, and it's called I Cannot Forgive. When Rudy wrote his one book in 1963 with a man named Alan Bestick, it was called I Cannot Forgive. And the title has been changed since then to I Survived Auschwitz. Or the title I Cannot Forgive was looked upon as being kind of anti-Christian. Somebody said, well, it's not very nice to say that. And I believe that I Cannot Forgive is a fantastic title. And I'm going to tell you later on why I prefer it to the other titles. But Gillian gave me a copy of the first edition of that book, which Rudy has signed. And I like the fact that the paper's falling off it. And I want it out in public anyway. I'm not going to preserve it. That's Rudy's book, and he signed it. The other thing that Gillian gave me, which is even, I think, a little more interesting than that, is that when Rudy had to come to Canada, he didn't want to be stopped at the border where they look into his background and say, oh, you're a communist because you were originally from Slovakia, and Czechoslovakia was taken over by the communists, and you fought in a communist unit, you're a commie, you can't get into Canada or the US. So he was fearful of that when he was coming to work in Canada. So he left behind on the kitchen table his Medal of Valor for bravery as a partisan, because he couldn't take it with him. And to make a long story short, Jillian gave it to me. This is Rudy's medal. And what I'd like to do tonight, I'm going to pass it around in the audience, and as I'm talking, you can pass it to one another, and I'm pretty sure that this crowd, by the end of the meeting, is going to give it back to me. Okay? Okay. Now we shall begin. Walter Rosenberg was born in 1924 in Czechoslovakia. Walter Rosenberg was Rudolf Vrba's original name. His father, Rosenberg, I've only now found out, actually came from Transylvania, which is in Romania. And I didn't know that in time when I was writing this volume 1, but thank goodness there's a volume 2 because I can fix it. But so he came to live in Czechoslovakia, and he had 3 children. I think his wife must have died. And so he had 2 sons and a daughter, and he needed a wife. And so he married a woman named Helena, and she became the stepmother to these 3 children. She wanted to get pregnant. She couldn't get pregnant for a long time. Finally, she got pregnant. Hooray, hooray. It's a boy. His name is Walter. So Walter grew up, and at age 4, the family went to live in eastern Slovakia, and he ran a timber business, but he got a liver ailment and died. So the family had to come back to central Czechoslovakia. Helena, the mother, with baby Walter, which is Rudy, and then 3 much older siblings who didn't need to be looked after anymore. The mother, to make a living, had to leave Walter with her parents, his grandparents, in a place called Nitra. I don't know whether there's 4 names and I never know how to pronounce them, but I just go ahead. Doesn't matter. Nitra. So meanwhile, she's off, and she makes money by selling women's lingerie, and she makes lingerie, and she's a traveling saleswoman selling women's underwear, while Rudy is growing up with a very conventional Jewish family, his grandparents. And at the time, they realized this is a bright kid. They started training Rudy to be a rabbi. At a young age, he had the potential to be a rabbi, because he was clearly very, very clever. So he lives with his grandparents for a couple of years, and he gets conditioned into traditional Judaic studies, etc. So he had some religious upbringing for a while. But then when his grandmother got ill, the grandfather couldn't look after him. Rudy was then sent to live in an orphanage in the Bratislava area. His mother knew it was there. And even though he wasn't an orphan, it was a place that he could stay and study. So he's a very bright kid. Very bright kid, and they notice he's smart. Right? They would take him to be babysit in a schoolroom, and the kids would be like 6 years older than him, and he'd be doing all the classes ahead of them, and so people knew there's something very unusual about this kid, and he knew it too, I think. So because he was this golden boy, the only child, right? He had the older siblings helping him along, and his mother doted on him. So he was a mama's boy in a way. He could do no wrong, and he was brilliant. In fact, he was so smart, it frightened his mother a little bit. When he was a young guy growing up, like, I don't know, 10, 12, he was reading a lot of Russian literature. And his mother kind of thought, this is weird. My son's a bit weird. I better take him to. So she took Rudy, Walter, to the doctor because he thought there was something wrong with him. And fortunately, the doctor was a fan of Tolstoy and Chekhov and said, "Don't worry, kid, you're okay." But so Rudy was brilliant from an early age. And so when he was in school, and then the Nuremberg laws were being passed, and eventually all the freedoms were being taken away, and eventually, as you know, the Jewish children in Czechoslovakia were not allowed to go to high school anymore. So when that happened, they had to give away, they couldn't, all their freedoms were restricted. The kids who couldn't go to school anymore formed their own informal school in a meadow where they would go and teach one another. And of course, Rudy was already very scientific oriented, and he was performing, reading textbooks and stuff like that. So the kids interviewed, and he was one of the leaders of this group that was educating itself. And so in that group was a young girl about maybe 2 or 3 years younger than him. Her name was Goethe. And Goethe kind of was smitten by this brilliant guy named Rudy. Walter. He was still Walter, pardon me. And so Goethe becomes a very interesting character. She idolizes this guy and is kind of smitten with him, but Walter doesn't want to pay her any attention because she's too young. And Walter's kind of got high standards in terms of like, he himself thinks he's the catch, right? This is Rudy. And if you know Rudy, I mean, he could be, but we're not there yet. So they meet, and Goethe and Rudy become close, and Goethe's father hires Rudy to tutor her. And they go into the, Walter's doing these experiments and blowing things up, and they actually blew up a shed once. And so she idolizes him, but he's not interested because she's just not good looking enough, smart enough, all these other things. And so, but there's a relationship starts right there. Rudy, quickly things worsen, and he can see the way it's going, and the famous expression that Rudy would say to his mother or anybody else, "I don't want to be deported like a calf in a wagon." Because that was literally what would happen. They would put people in wagons and take them away. So it wasn't, and he was adamant that this isn't going to happen to me. So he says to his mother, I'm out of here. So his mother gives him money to take a taxi cab to as far as he could go to get to the border of Hungary. Because he wants to go into Hungary, because his goal, he's about 15, 16 at this time, is to get out of Hungary. You can get from Hungary possibly to join the Tito forces in Yugoslavia, or else possibly get to England and fight the Nazis that way. So he naively crosses the border and gets himself to Budapest. So he thinks, oh great, Budapest I can get from here and become a fighter some way. So in Budapest he goes and tries to get some help from the Zionist organization, and he's appalled that the Zionists look at him and say, "Where's your papers? You can't hang out with us. You're going to get us in trouble." And this is a very important thing that happened, because Rudy became an anti-Zionist, and possibly the seeds for his anti-Zionism came from his umbrage at discovering that they weren't going to help him. And he was very, very upset by this, and he decided, I have to go back to Slovakia and start over again. So he tried to get himself back to Slovakia. He was picked up by the Hungarian border guards and beaten up savagely. And then there was a no man's land. They beat you up, and then they send you into no man's land and they shoot you. But he managed to evade getting shot, so he got to the Slovakian side, where their border guards are also by this time pro-Nazi, and he gets beaten up all over again. And in this book I list 24 ways that he died within a 2-year period. So this is just 2 of them, just 2. So he was badly beaten up again and put into a prison camp, or a detention center at a place called Nowaki, which is full of people who are basically going to be shipped into Poland, God knows where, possibly to Auschwitz. But they were people all males who were going to be removed from Slovakia, and he's one of the youngest people there, and he can't get over the fact that everybody's sort of just kind of waiting around to have their, you know, whatever's going to happen to them, and he said, I'm getting out of here. So he hatched an escape plan, and he managed to escape with this other kid, but the other kid double-crossed him and didn't do the things that he promised to do, and then Rudy found himself stranded. So so he learned a lesson there about trust, and you can't trust anybody. And so he then the way he got captured again was very interesting, because there was a policeman who noticed there's a person there, he's wearing 2 sets of socks. That's weird. And that weird little item made him run after Rudy and question him, and there's like Keystone Cops, there was a chase scene, but he was captured again. So Rudy was captured having already fled a prison camp already, so he was bad boy number 1. So instead of being shipped off to Poland in a cattle car, as we know about those, he had a 2-man guard escort him into Poland, because they knew that he was a bad boy and he was trouble. So he was sent to a place called Majdanek, or is it, somebody here is it Majdanek? Or, because they made, spelling's hard. Anyway, again, pronunciation is difficult for me. Anyway, and Rudy later said Majdanek was worse than Auschwitz. The conditions there were so bad. And he'd only been there a short time, and he said, I got to get out of this place. And it was, so somebody was saying that you could go and do gardening work at this other camp if you wanted to volunteer for doing this kind of garden work. And he said, I'm going to go and do that. And the guy he's with said, you're crazy, man. Don't buy into that. But it just sounded better than where he was. So he volunteered to go to some place called Auschwitz to do this gardening job. It didn't take long to find out the gardening job was actually digging up thousands and thousands of corpses of Russian soldiers, which would be lethal because, of course, it's unhealthy. And the guards there most of the guards who oversaw these things were given alcohol at the beginning of the day, and that's how they could bear just being there. But doing the labor for that kind of thing would be deadening. And even then, if all the corpses were dug up to be burned, at the end of that, they would then kill all the people who dug up all the corpses. So Rudy would have been dead. It's yet another time when he should have died. But early on, when he got to Auschwitz I, the camp that he was in, one of the capos are the guys who ran to look after the prisoners and were usually somewhat cruel to them, to keep them in order. But anyway, one of the capos saw Rudy. Rudy was still in, pretty formidable looking guy. And he said, oh, and he walked up to Rudy, and he just all of a sudden slugged him in the stomach. And Rudy didn't wince. And he said, oh. So Rudy was then bought from one capo to this guy said, I want this guy in my unit. And so he bought Rudy's life for the cost of 1 lemon. 1 lemon was a big price, but he said, this guy, I can use this guy. So Rudy was again saved from certain death because he was in another different unit in Auschwitz. And Rudy and all, when I started doing this research, I had 0 education about the Holocaust in school, none. I didn't realize that there were 3 Auschwitzes and not 1, meaning there was an original Auschwitz I, which Commander Hoss, Hoess, was the main person who ran Auschwitz, but he was also the main builder of the first camp called Auschwitz I. But then when Himmler decided we want to make Auschwitz the place for killing as many Jews as possible, as quickly as possible, that is Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is separate from Auschwitz I, physically very close together. But there's a separate camp which we couldn't call Auschwitz II, which is Auschwitz-Birkenau, and that's where the crematoria were. And that was where the trains would come into Auschwitz II. But what I didn't know, there was an Auschwitz III. I mean, now I kind of take it for granted this, but I know when I started in this research, I didn't know there was an Auschwitz III. And that was called Auschwitz-Birkenau. And what that was an area set aside from the other two, a very much larger area where German large companies could come and use slave labor. And they were trying to make various products, synthetic oil, whatever. But it was really a slave labor camp for the large companies in Germany. And many of those companies were tried after the war. That's a whole other story. But anyway, so Rudy was there for a brief period there. And again, he brilliantly got out of there by chance. But so he actually he was in Auschwitz I, Auschwitz II, and Auschwitz III. So when you want to find someone who knows about Auschwitz, somebody who's been in all three places, Rudy knew that. So Rudy managed to stay there for almost 2 years. And he, of course, there's a famous escape, which you probably know, with his comrade Wexler. They did manage to escape. But before that happened, there's something that's really, one of the things that go into this book that hasn't been examined before, is that in Auschwitz-Birkenau, there was something called the Czech family camp. And that was where they would bring the Czechs in and let them have all their clothes. The kids were there. There was a school. There was this little part of Auschwitz where the Czechoslovakian Jews could appear to live a somewhat normal life. And they needed to have that because they could then bring in the complicit Red Cross, because the Red Cross was centered, of course, in Switzerland, but there was a German Red Cross as well. And the German Red Cross, I've read some books about this now that I know. The German Red Cross had a huge deal of influence on what the Swiss Red Cross did. So the Red Cross, actually, if you know a lot of stuff, you realize they're actually complicit, because they were complicit in doing nothing when they knew a lot. So and I didn't know any of this, but I read a book about this, and I go, well, why don't people know this? Why don't people think this? But anyway, the Red Cross would come and investigate these model camps that the Nazis set up, and say, oh yes, they're treating the Jews very, very well. So the Czech family camp was there for that function, in case they ever had to show off that people were fine. So in that Czech family camp, people had their own clothes, and they could appear to lead a semi-normal life. Rudy fell in love with a woman in the Czech family camp who was 2 or 3 years older than him. Her name was Alice Monk. And he's by now 17 or so, like that. He's still a virgin. And to make it, brief story short, they received news that the Czech family camp was going to be liquidated. And the underground in Auschwitz were horrified. What can we do? Can we start an uprising of some sort? Can we do something rather than nothing? And Rudy, by this time, had done, as a courier, he had got to know one of the main Czech family camp leaders, a guy named Freddie Hirsch. And they decided, well, we need to get a rebellion started in the camp before they are taken away to be liquidated, because we know they're going to die, so we got to get a rebellion. Rudy was the messenger between the underground and the Czech family camp. They tried to get this guy, Freddie Hirsch, to start up a rebellion, because he's so charismatic, people would follow him. And Rudy was the guy trying to get Hirsch to do this, and Hirsch kind of copped out and supposedly injected himself or something, but he killed him, committed suicide. But meanwhile, Rudy had fallen in love with Catherine Monk in the Czech family camp. Rudy was able to sleep with her one night. They made love together one night. He's 17 or 18, I don't know, virgin. And the next morning, she's clinging to him, saying, please save me, please save me. Please. He can't save her. And so the first woman he ever loved, literally goes up the chimney a day later. Now, I think the psychological impact of that, I remember what I was like when I was 17 or 18. I was pretty earnest. And and you're capable of very deep feelings. And I believe that that tragedy had a great deal to do with Rudy's motivation to escape. Now, of course, in retrospect, he had to escape because he wanted to tell the world what was happening in Auschwitz. Very true. But I think your zeal to escape as an act of revenge would be very palpable for someone as emotional as he was. And so I think that's a very important story that needs to be given more credence. But unfortunately, you see, academic historians, they don't look into stuff like that. They're into some pieces of paper and facts, and if you can't prove something, you can't say it. And I really increasingly take objection to the approach of that kind of history, because there's more to life than numbers and pieces of paper. And so I'm telling you that story because these are Rudy's beginnings. And so when he decided, I'm going to escape, ostensibly, he wants to let the world know, which he did. But so now we're getting on to the escape part, which is the famous part of his story. And as you know, there's a man named Jonathan Friedland, and he wrote a book called The Escape Artist about Rudy. And I think it's absolutely a misleading and inappropriate title, and I'll tell you why. Rudy was a report artist. He was not an escape artist. He escaped once and got caught. And this time, this escape was not the escape that either Rudy wrote about or that then Friedland, who was basically siphoning off Rudy's book and his material in his book and rewriting it. So he didn't do the research to go to the FDR library where Rudy's papers are and find this out, but he did. And what really happened is that Rudy and Wexler, his partner, Arnold Wexler was also from Slovakia, about 4 or 5 years older than him, also a very bright man. And I met Rudy, and he told me the story, and he didn't tell me the real story either. Well, there was this wood pile in a place called Mexico. We have a slide about Mexico. This is the Mexico moment. There it is. I don't know where I can point it out. Now, there's a little yellow box. You can barely see it. I'm going to go point to it, okay? It's not going to, we'll take a quick commercial break.